So, Kotaku recently reported that video game market analyst Newzoo released a report which revealed that 66 titles accounted for 80% of overall playtime in 2023, meaning that the vast majority of people are playing older games. People are not playing new games as much, or they play them, they pick up, and they put them down sooner. Why is that? Why is it that people are stuck playing the same games, older titles, myself included, and new things coming out are not as engaging? I thought it'd be interesting to kind of give my opinion on this, as somebody that's been playing video games for the better past of like the last 2 decades plus. And what I've observed change in the gaming industry, for like a quick context here of age reference, I am 28, about to be 29. My first console that I played video games on was a Super Nintendo. It's very interesting to go from that old of a console, right, a Super Nintendo, all the way up to like a PS5 now, or the way modern PC gaming is. I remember growing up playing games on the 64, Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Mario Party, Mario Kart, Age of Mythology, Star Wars Battlefront, a lot of these older games, and just seeing the comparison of why some of those games I still pick up and replay today or continue to play, or why I've been playing mostly games like RimWorld, which have been out for several years now, or Battle Brothers, also several years. And even for games that are free to play, that are more on that live service type of thing. I mostly, up until a while ago, pretty much only played League of Legends and Master Duel. And why did I play exactly Master Duel? Well, because I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For also like 2 decades, right? So I think that this is an interesting conversation, because I think that a lot of this is the fault of the industry. And I wanted to give my opinion and take on why I think that is. A lot of that, I think, is also psychological with how things work. A lot of people are blaming the economy and cost of games. I don't really think that is all the issue, or even that might be a slight percentage of the issue. I know it is an issue, but I don't think it's the main reason. So my first theory of why this is going on particularly applies on the live service game side of things. Like, why are people playing only League of Legends and Fortnite and some of these older live service games, and they're not really getting into the new shiny stuff that might even be better, or might have better graphics, or it's just a change of something that you've been doing for the last 10 years. Why are people still playing a game like League of Legends? Well, number one, it is really, really good, but I think there's a lot more to it. You can use Genshin Impact as another example as well. There are at least a couple of reasons that I think this is the case. Number one, I'm going to cite a phrase that most of you, if not all of you, are probably very familiar with, which states, "A body in motion tends to stay at motion, and a body at rest tends to stay at rest." This is Isaac Newton's first law of motion. And this is very clearly the case. Humans tend to stay stuck in patterns. There's multiple reasons why this could be, right? It could be because of a sense of survival. If it's something that has been bringing you joy, it associates with some primal instinct of survival, right? Because if you're depressed or you're not feeling well, that can lead to, not surviving or general well-being. People in general tend to stay stuck in loops of the things that they've been doing forever. One of the biggest and most difficult things you ask anybody that has an addiction, the hardest thing to do is break the habit. I used to be a smoker, and the hardest thing for me with quitting smoking wasn't really what smoking brought me, or a sense of joy, or whatever it was. It was simply the habit. That's why vape pens are so popular now, right? Because people can't seem to give up that act of smoking and other things like eating, right? So they find alternatives to still quench that habit, that addictiveness of remaining in that motion. If you've been doing something for so long and you've been alive, well, it must be what's keeping you alive, or it must be what's keeping you happy, right? Another example for me, I've been a League of Legends player for like 10 years, and I've played as a Vayne main for like 9 or 8 of those years. I was never particularly amazing in the game or anything, and I recently had to completely quit playing the game because of health reasons that I've discussed in another video. But in a way, I miss it tremendously. But in a way, it was good for me because I noticed I was definitely stuck in a pattern. I just queued up in a one-trick vein, and I just played League of Legends. I played other games too, but I mostly played League of Legends. That is mostly what I did with my free time. And I was stuck in a pattern of doing that for years and years, to the point where if I wasn't doing that for a week, I would almost like subconsciously force myself to go back to playing, because if I'm not playing this, you don't feel right. Like you feel like there is some sort of break in your routine. There's something that's wrong in the universe, so you must go back to doing that thing that you always do. We are creatures of habit in nature. I think that is the number one reason why people stay stuck in the same life service games. Using just Genshin as an example, like people don't want to lose their waifus. League of Legends, people don't want to lose their rank. They've invested all this time, which the second reason is investment, and I'll talk about that. But they've put in all this time mastering these characters, mastering this game, maybe creating a reputation, creating a circle of friends, where a big part of their social life perhaps, or their sense of worth, their sense of self, comes from playing these games and doing this. In Buddhism, it is believed that you have your true self and you have your ego, your shadow self. And the ego is almost like a separate entity that does everything that it can to keep itself alive. It is your projected sense of self. And if you've done something for so long, like let's use League of Legends as an example again, or Fortnite or whatever, if you've done something for so long where you have this network of friends that's associated with the game, your sense of self, your sense of worth, especially when you're younger, everything is tied into this game. To delete that game, uninstall it, or stop playing or break that pattern is to delete or erode your sense of self. You're almost like killing yourself in a way. It's not really you, it's that projected ego that Buddhism and other religions talk about, but you're almost getting rid of that spirit that you identify as yourself. It's definitely a survival mechanism. Like most things that our brain does tend to revolve around survival. And I'm not a psychologist or a sociologist or whatever the heck, or like a know-it-all, but I do believe that the vast majority of things that our brain does are with the intention of survival. So probably what's going on is if you've lived your life in a certain pattern or in a certain way that has kept you alive, if you remain in that same pattern, you are likely to remain alive. Almost like a preservation of the self, preservation of species, survival mechanism of the brain. Doing new things, taking risk, adventure, changing patterns could lead to not survival, right? Especially in other times, but even today. Whereas if you remain doing the same things and in the same patterns of things that have created a routine that have kept you alive for so long, your brain is most likely going to continue encouraging you to do those things that have kept you alive for so long. Maybe I'm not right, but I do think it has to do with that. I am a big believer in evolutionary psychology, and I do believe a lot, the vast majority really, of what we do and what our brain does is with the intention of survival, and most things come down to that. It's a very primal thing. Using another example here for me personally, right? I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For almost 2 decades. I've really not been happy with the current state of the game for years. I mostly just play older formats for the game, but somehow I continue to play the game. Why is that? Probably because it's something that's intimately tied into my childhood and adolescence. It is tied with some of the best memories I have from my childhood, and I've been doing it for years. So to let go of that now is almost like letting go of a part of my identity and a part of myself. And then you have the reason number 2, which is investment, which we can use the Yu-Gi-Oh! Example again. You've spent all this money on these cards, right? Maybe use another TCG as an example, or let's use even a live service game. Again, League of Legends, Fortnite. You've spent all this money on these skins, on these cards, on these upgrades, on these items, whatever they are. If I look at my League of Legends account, I've probably spent hundreds of dollars in skins on it. To delete it, or to get rid of it, or to stop playing, it's almost like giving up $1,000 investment. Same thing with Yu-Gi-Oh! For me to stop playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, sure, you can try to liquidate some of your cards, but most of them are not worth what they were when you bought them. So for you to now get rid of that is almost like accepting or taking a loss. And people tend to hold on to those things because they don't want to lose. It's like when you go to the poker table or the blackjack table. Just one more hand, just one more round, just one more time. Because you don't want to leave at a loss. How many games, how many people who play games online, PvP, have you heard say, I can't log off until I get a win. I can't log off now that I lost. Because it's that gambling thing. You never want to feel like you're at a loss. You never want to log out until you get to the same number of LP that you had before you started, or the same rank that you started the day at. If you leave, you were, I don't know, gold 1 and now you're gold 3 when you log off for the day. You're going to feel like you did nothing with your day. There is a sense of, I wasted my time, I wasted my life because I accomplished nothing. So you will continue playing or continue doing that to not lose your investment. There is a name for this term in gambling and psychology, and it's called chasing. Chasing is the attempt to recover gambling losses by continuing to gamble. And I think that a lot of these games, especially the live service games, play into this. And a lot of the games, even though they're not necessarily wanting to play into this, they're not trying to, because of the nature of how they work, like some of the games I described, that's the same effect, and it's affecting you psychologically the same way. Not you necessarily, but a lot of people clearly. And League of Legends is kind of the best example for me personally, just on how it works and how I'm familiar with how people act with that. Dude, chasing is really, really common. Right? You lose through 2 games, now you got to win 3 games. And you start almost like compromising with yourself. Yeah, I have to work tomorrow, but I could play an extra 2 hours to try to make up my losses. And I'll just be a little more tired for work tomorrow, but I'm not going to get fired. It's not the end of the world. And that's how gambling and, poker tables happen. Okay, I've lost a lot of money, but you know what? I came with a set amount of money that I can spend. Okay, now I've blown through all the money that I had to spend. Well, I mean, I get a bonus this month. I get more money. What's the problem with, going in and playing another $5 grand? Then you lose the 2 or 5 grand. Well, you know what? I don't really need this. You start making these concessions with yourself, and you start convincing yourself that it's okay to put more and more into it, whether it be time, whether it be money. And for some people, it takes that leap to the extreme where it's like, I need to recover my losses, or my wife will never forgive me, or I'll never forgive myself, or I'll feel like a loser. So I'm going to sell my house to keep gambling. I'm going to sell my car. I'm going to do whatever. I don't think that with games or League of Legends, it's something that extreme, but I do think it plays on that psychology as well, where, my Discord and my list of friends basically consists of people that 3/4 of them are unhappy all the time because they're on a losing streak on League of Legends. While there is a point where you can't play anymore, or you're tired of it, or you're frustrated and you quit playing, there is definitely a psychological effect that it has on you. And it's quite funny. As someone who loves League of Legends, it is very interesting to see that probably 95 to 99% of everyone I know that plays League of Legends is never really happy. And it's not just League. This happens with a lot of games. It's like people are on this constant sense of despair between something that is oftentimes not completely in their control, but they are on this pattern of winning and losing, and their sense of how good of a day they're having comes from the win or loss of that game. And you can tell that they're not really so much in love with the game. It's about the investment. I've been playing League of Legends for years. I continue to play it. This is what I do. And they're stuck in this pattern where they're not really happy with the game anymore, and all they really need is like a month break or something like that to come back refreshed. But they won't stop because they need to hit that rank, or they lost too many times and they need to recover their losses. It's very few people that I know that actively played this game and other games that are even having a good time, yet that consumes 90% of their free time somehow. And why is that? I do think, and I firmly believe, it's because of this gambling mentality. It plays in something primal from our psyche of not wanting to come back home from the hunt empty-handed, or the tribe will starve, something like that. It plays on something very dramatic and important for our sense of self and well-being. And it does tap into that gambling thing, which is why a lot of people won't venture into other games or live service games in particular, because you've already invested 8 hours in this one game. Why would you now split that time with another game and be mediocre at both of them when you can continue being on this game? Why would you start being in motion when you could continue being at rest? Why would you start playing this other game when you're already stuck on the loop of playing this one game? And the answer is because these companies have gotten people addicted to their games. There is only so many people in the world, so many people of age that play games, and whatever games that have managed to hook their interest, especially live service games, which will be my third thing, which is a replayability factor. A lot of games have that modern games don't have, is a huge replayability factor. A lot of that comes to that replayability and getting you stuck in a loop. Let's say there's 10 people in the world and 5 of them are gamers. If you can get 4 to 5 of those gamers stuck in a loop to where they feel like their entire sense of worth and self and everything or whatever is somehow tied to this game in some way, even if a slight part of their free time is tied into this game, if you get them stuck in that loop, it will be very hard to get them out of that loop. It is no coincidence why I use, again, League of Legends, but there are other games as well that fall in this category. Fortnite, for example. Why are people playing the same game over and over? Because that's what they know. That's what they're comfortable in. That's what they've invested hundreds of dollars in skins and items in. That's what they've invested their time in. That's where their friends are. And that's the loop that they've been stuck in for years. Maybe I'm alone here, but when I first stopped playing League of Legends, it's been now maybe 3 or 4 months, maybe 5, I felt emotionally ill. And I know that's going to sound really stupid, especially for a guy like, I have a family, I'm 28 years old, I work, I have a life outside of this, but I did feel emotionally / physically ill from not playing League of Legends. Why is that? Well, because so much of my life has been tied into that, whether it be financial investment, whether it be time investment, emotional investment, whatever it is, it clearly is very real for a lot of people. And I love Dota 2, for example. I play Dota 2 as well, but it never captivated me the same way as League of Legends did, because League of Legends was the one that got me first stuck on that loop first. So I don't have those memories with Dota 2. I don't have that nostalgia. I don't have that long-term connection with the game. So I'll pick up a new game and I'll play it for a while and I'll put it down. But I always will keep coming back to those same games because they've got me stuck on that loop. And the final thing, which I don't know how true it is, but it is my belief that older games, and especially live service games, but I'm talking about, again, games that I play, like Total War series games, like Battle Brothers, like a RimWorld and The Sims or whatever other games, I do think that for some games in some franchises, because this is even for new games launching for old franchises, people tend to gravitate to those franchises. I do think that replayability value is a huge factor. For me, it is the most important factor when considering buying a game. And a lot of these new games don't focus on that. They are very focused on better graphics or hitting certain buzzwords or hitting certain things, and the replayability of the game is not really important. What's really important is the engagement with the game. For the 10 hours, 20, 30, 40, 50 hours that you're playing this game, we don't really care if you ever replay it again. We want to know how engaged you are with it and how willing to not only buy the game you are, but how willing are you to put money into it. Let's use RimWorld as an example. RimWorld is a game that I've put hundreds of hours on. I don't really, it doesn't have microtransactions, it just has DLC. What is really the incentive for this company, other than making a good game, to create a game that's infinitely replayable, but doesn't have, say, a shop or a store? They can put DLC in it, but that's additional content. That's a little different. Versus a game like Dragon's Dogma that came out, that was great, but had the shop feature, and how a lot of these single player games that shouldn't have these online shops attached to them have those shops. Why are they there? The focus is to keep you engaged enough or create some sort of problem where you can sell the solution or entice you in some way that once you're enticed enough to buy the game because it looks pretty, whatever, and you spend that initial money, and then after that there is some sort of enticement or reason to continue spending money on it. And once you've spent enough that the company deems this is probably the amount that somebody would be willing to spend on this game, that's it. They're not concerned with the replayability of the game. They're concerned with making a good enough story, a good enough sequence of events, an engaging enough game, a good looking enough game to where you might get bored of it in 20 hours, but for those 20 hours that of gameplay that you watched, that will convince you to buy the game. And hey, you might want to be able to fast travel, so you'll buy some crystals. Or you might want to look good while you're playing it, so you'll buy a skin, you'll buy this, you'll buy that. Live service is a little different. It takes that to an extreme because it continues going and you're meant to engage with it forever. But I'm particularly talking about these new single player games that come out, which seem to not be as captivating, and I find myself playing a lot of them. And a lot of them are really good. I just don't find myself ever replaying them. I find myself like buying the game, sometimes buying the gold edition, buying the DLC, playing through it once, maybe twice at a higher difficulty if there is a difficulty setting, and then I'll never play it again. Versus a lot of older games, RTSs, and the way they were designed, they have a loop that they're infinitely replayable. That doesn't seem to be as big of a concern for companies now. It doesn't seem to be as good of a concern to make a good game. The concern is really the profit that that game will generate. And that's just how business operates, right? When a CEO gets promoted into that position, he has one job: quarterly profits, earning those shareholders, those investors money. That is his one job. The CEO's job is not really to make a good game necessarily. That's kind of a consequence of profit, right? Number one is profit, and usually you make something profitable by making at least a half decent game. But the concern of the CEO and the job that he's hired for, most of the time, that CEO, especially for these big AAA companies, that's not the game developer. That's not the guy that put his heart and soul into making this game, and this is like his baby, his passion project. This is just a company that they took over, and their job is to make money. And if they're not making money, they're going to get fired, and their family's going to be on the street. So they don't care about anything else, and neither do the shareholders or investors. Their exclusive job is to every quarter increase profits no matter what. And that will come at the cost of quality. I do think that that is a short-term mindset, because a lot of these games end up being terrible. They make short-term profits, but they won't create a franchise, or they won't make long-term profits. But the job and the goal is to increase quarterly profits every quarter however they can. And that's the main focus, not really making a good game. People like to make it seem, which sometimes it is, but people like to make it seem like, oh, it's greed, it's corporate greed, it's the CEO being greedy, greed. That's the main word that I hear people use when explaining this, is greed. And I don't really think that that is the right word. It is simply of the nature of the current industry. At the end of the day, everybody's a cog in a machine. The CEO is not necessarily in that position because of some sort of passion. He's in that position because the owners of the company or the investors or whoever hired him think he can do a good job of bringing profits. And the job of the CEO is to make profits. It might be even somebody that doesn't necessarily even have a love or passion for games. His passion is for business. And the investors and the owners, the shareholders, they might not like games either. They might not be as interested in the media as we are. Their goal is they're investing into something to make money. They don't care if the game is good. They're probably not going to play it. They're just investing in it, hoping for a return. So the problem isn't really like greed or corporate greed. The problem is the current structure. And it's up to us as the consumers to support people's passion projects and indie games and whatnot, versus keeping these AAA companies on life support. Honestly, at the end of the day, it might sound corny, but only us, the consumers, can change that and can make a difference. It is up to us to prioritize investing in people that their primary focus is to make a good game. If profit comes from it, great. But the primary objective is making a good game, and hopefully it sells. Versus the other way around, where we're currently supporting companies that their primary goal is profit, and hopefully the game is half decent. The companies themselves are not really to blame. We are the ones that are funding and encouraging, as a whole, this business model. Capitalism is just going to do what capitalism does. Companies are just going to do what they do. The CEO is just going to do their job. The shareholders and the investors are only going to invest if they see a good possibility of return. A game that's a huge risk that we don't know if at the end of the day it's going to be profitable or not. Think of it for yourself. Would you invest your hard-earned money? Would you invest your family's money if this wasn't something that was for leisure, a passion project that you're investing in? If you're simply going into it as an investor, hoping to retire or make money off of this, why would you invest in a passion project versus investing on something where the primary goal is profit? That's not necessarily greed, that's just being a smart investor. We can't really blame people and companies and investors for playing their role. The only people to blame in this really are ourselves. And the way we stop it is we stop supporting it. Vote with your money. It's not like current Call of Duty or current Assassin's Creed or whatever was created by two guys in a basement and this was their passion project and they just set out to make the most fun game ever. No, it's created by a soulless corporation, which their job is just to try to make as many sales as they can right off the bat, get microtransactions, get DLCs, and increase quarterly profits, and then move on to the next thing in 6 months to a year. That's why we see the same games coming out and finished. That's why we see the same repetitive gameplay in games coming out every single year, because it's all about hitting those quotas. It's not about taking an extra 5 years to create a once in a lifetime experience. That's not the goal. It's more profitable to create 5 mediocre games sometimes that at least sell well enough every year versus creating one game that was a masterpiece but took 5 years to make, and maybe you even took a loss on it. That's unfortunately just how it works. And more so now, where bigger companies are getting more involved in these games and bigger acquisitions are happening, especially in the AAA game space, we see that more and more, where that love and that passion is really not there, because that's something that comes on an individual level. It doesn't come on that macro level. I'm not saying that everybody that works at Blizzard or everybody that works at Activision or Ubisoft, no one there has no passion for video games. I'm sure most people do. But as a company, as a corporation, as a mission that company has, love and joy is not really the goal. Profit is the goal. And that's why those games are not as good. That's why people play the few games that come out that they found that passion, that they found that replayability, and that's why they get stuck with those games. Games for a while now, a good part of them have been all about keeping people playing the game, especially live service, and keeping people attached and stuck in that loop. It's all about keeping people consistently and constantly stuck and engaged with that game. Why are people only playing these older games? Why is 80% of people only playing these same titles? Because those companies succeeded. These are people who are geniuses at marketing. They study psychology. They know how the human mind works. And they have one objective: keep you stuck playing the same thing. It's no surprise that they've succeeded. Why are no people playing new stuff? Because the previous people succeeded first. And now those people are stuck in that pattern that they've been stuck for the last 10 years. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. I'm not here to tell you what to do or to convince you. I've certainly been a victim, quote unquote, and been subject to a lot of these practices working on me as well. I'm just kind of saying how I see it. I'm not saying it's good or bad or right or wrong. It's just kind of what it is. And the final reason, which ties into what I was saying before, where the objective is quarterly profits, I don't think this is the main reason, but it's certainly a reason. A lot of people are broke right now. Games are now $70. In other countries, like where I'm from, Brazil, I remember like a new game for like the PS3 or something would be like $200 to $350, you know? When you take that dollar to real conversion for the games that are made here and sold there, it is really expensive, not only for North Americans, but on a global scale. People around the world, and not just in North America, don't have money to buy these games. That is certainly a factor, and I don't think that going up from $60 to $70 has made that much of an impact. But in general, we are going through what could be called a soon-to-be or current recession in our country, and the world seems to be going through that recession currently. Some more than others, but a lot of countries are struggling in general with their economy. Like it or not, globally, economies are tied together. So when one country or one superpower is suffering economically, that tends to trickle down to multiple other countries as well. So globally, we are struggling as people financially. So even if those same games weren't $70, they were $60, I don't think that would have made that much of a difference. It would have, but not that much of a difference. I think people would be just as hesitant in spending $60 currently than they would have been spending $70. It's still a high price for a game that might be, and often is, unfinished or mediocre either way. And that's just to do with the economy. But I do think that game developers blaming the economy for their lack of engaging gameplay loop and lack of concern with replayability of a game, I do think that blaming of the economy is kind of a cop-out and an excuse not to lose your job also. I think it is certainly a factor, but I think a lot of it is also consumers have been burned so often by new games that end up coming out unfinished, like No Man's Sky, like Cyberpunk, and a lot of other games I could mention. We've been burnt out so many times by these games that we just don't want to take the risk anymore. It's that fool me once kind of idea. It's not just that it's $10 more expensive than it used to be. Sure, that plays a factor, but a lot of it is baggage of 10 years of being fooled, and I don't want to be fooled again. It's a pattern that we've observed, and we're getting smarter. And that's my opinion on why this is the case and why that's going on. Thanks for listening.